What is up guys, my name is Naga220 and welcome back to our series of guides on gear set composition. Patch 1.6 has finally arrived and with it come significant new challenges in how we compose our gear. This is entirely due to armor no longer being a major attribute and therefore cannot be rolled during recalibration. It has been entirely replaced with health. What this means is that an optimized build in patch 1.5 on average would allow you to mitigate around 52% of incoming bullet damage. This no doubt played a major role in completing some of the more difficult PvE content the Division had to offer. Fast forward to patch 1.6, and this, my fellow agents, is not the case, since most of us on average are sitting on 31% armor because the only sources of armor apart from talents comes from the base armor stat on your gear. This change, in my honest opinion, was really needed in order to balance endgame PvP. However, from a PvE standpoint, a change like this, without also reducing the armor on NPCs or scaling back their damage, makes the new legendary mission difficulty very challenging indeed. Today, I will be showcasing a highly optimized FireCrest utility build that will give you tons of NPC crowd control, a fairly decent amount of DPS, and substantial sustained healing. FireCrest, unfortunately, is one of the most underutilized gear sets in the game, and crowd control is one of the more critical roles that needs to be filled on a squad in order to successfully complete legendary missions. So, without further delay, let's jump in. With this build, we were able to achieve just over 294k DPS, 165k skill power, and 370k toughness, comprising of 31% armor and 251k health. These numbers will receive substantial gains based on skill use and of course talent synergy, which is where this build truly shines. Now, let's take a closer look at the individual gear pieces that make up this build, starting with the body armor. The Beret's bulletproof vest is an integral part of this build, since you will be heavily relying on that extra 10% increased armor and skill power. More so the armor because you want to have as much survivability as you possibly can. An extra 10% may not seem like much, but it can make all the difference whether or not you survive that extra hit from a shotgunner in order to revive fallen squad mates with a clutch recovery link and avoid resetting the mission. For the major attributes, you want to make sure that you have health and enemy armor damage, or health and exotic damage resilience rolled. As for the minor attributes, you need to have ammo capacity, since both your primary and secondary weapons are of the same weapon type. Now, if you do not own a Beret's bulletproof vest that has similar rolls, don't panic. A robust chest piece is a great substitute since it provides you with 10% extra armor the moment you go into any cover. As far as mods go, you want to use 2 prototype electronics mods with a health roll of at least 3k. Up next, the mask. For the major attribute, you want to have skill power rolled, as it not only improves the health and DPS of your turret, but also the effectiveness of your first aid skill and sustained healing received from the relentless talent. I will cover this in more detail once we get to the backpack. For the minor attribute, you need to ensure you have damage to elites rolled. As far as mods go, you want to use a prototype electronics mod with a health roll of at least 3k. Moving along to the knee pads. Once again, you want to have health rolled as your major attribute. For the minor attribute, damage to elites and any 2 stats will do. For mods, you should use a prototype firearms mod that has a health roll of at least 3k and a first aid self or ally healing performance mod. Now, let's examine the backpack. It is critical, agents, that you use a backpack that has the relentless talent. This is a key element of the build and is irreplaceable. The relentless talent gives you 5% of the damage dealt by your turret as healing, This synergizes incredibly well with the additional 30% turret damage, FireCrest set bonus, and provides a constant source of self-sustained healing as long as your turret is engaging enemies. 5% may seem small, but it's quite potent when you're doing a lot of damage. For the major attribute, you want to ensure that you have health with ammo capacity rolled as your minor attribute. For mods, you want to use a prototype electronics mod with a health roll of at least 3k and 2 turret damage performance mods. Moving along to the gloves. Critical hit damage and critical hit chance must be rolled on your gloves. For the third stat, you can either go with weapon damage of your choice or enemy armor damage. Last, but by no means least, the holster. When choosing a holster, you want to ensure that all the main stats are greater than 1100. As always, the ultimate goal is to have all 3 stats at 1272. For the major attribute, you want to ensure that you have reload speed or health, depending on if you plan to use weapon mods to increase your reload speed. As for mods, you want to use a turret health performance mod. That should cover the individual pieces of gear. I must point out that it doesn't matter which pieces of gear you roll into whichever primary stat as long as you have your gear in a 1 to 3 to 1 firearms to stamina to electronics ratio. That is to say, 3 pieces of your gear must be rolled with stamina as its main stat, while the other 2 pieces should be rolled in firearms and electronics respectively. Of course, the holster has all 3 main stats, hence the reason why it's excluded from the ratio. Make no mistake, agents, we have spent literally thousands of credits testing different combinations of stat rolls, and we can say without a doubt, if you do not have a minimum of 3 pieces of gear rolled in stamina, you are going to be folded by legendary NPCs. Though it is quite possible to make up the extra health with mods and major stat rolls, we have found that this is simply not enough survivability for legendary difficulty, especially if you rolled the majority of your gear into either firearms or electronics. The strength of this build comes from the insane amounts of raw damage potential when the 40% enemy armor damage is added to the 24% damage to elites achieved from your rolls. Then combined with the FireCrest set bonus and distracted weapon talent, you would have a whopping 33% extra damage to enemies on fire. You are going to not only stop rushing NPCs in their tracks, but burst them down before they can even reach you. And that right there, my fellow agents, is what we call effective crowd control. Okay agents, it's time to examine the weapons and talents you should be running with this build. My primary weapon is an exotic urban MDR. My secondary weapon is a LVOA-C, and my sidearm is an exotic Centurion. Now, I know the urban MDR is a very hard weapon to come by, so if you don't already own one, you can try using a bullfrog instead. It is important to note, however, that the urban MDR is a key element of this build and should be acquired as soon as humanly possible. The first weapon talent on the urban MDR is focused. Considering your first aid is probably always going to be on cooldown, this may not be the best talent. The only reason we're running this is because of the awesome RNG that exists in this game. Needless to say, focused isn't entirely useless, since you can benefit from this talent if your turret is still deployed when the skill is no longer on cooldown and your first aid is up. Ideally, this talent should be replaced with intense, ferocious, or talented. Next up, we have destructive. When this is combined with the innate armor damage bonus on the assault rifle and the additional bonuses that you would have rolled on your gear, you will be able to achieve over 40% enemy armor damage. This talent, my fellow agents, is a necessity since legendary NPCs have a shit ton of armor and you don't. Enemy armor damage is also the reason we recommend using assault rifles over any other weapon class for PvE activities. The third talent is Distracted. Damage is increased by 18% against targets with status effects. This is an amazing damage boosting talent and synergizes incredibly well with the FireCrest 4-piece 15% damage against burning targets bonus. When this is used with the additional enemy armor damage and damage to elites, you're going to achieve significant gains to your DPS. And considering that this is not a DPS focused build, that's not bad at all. Let's look at the LVOA-C. The first talent here is Unforgiving. Unforgiving has the highest damage modifier in the game, giving you insane amounts of damage at low health. And considering you're rarely ever going to be at full health, it's almost a guaranteed 10 to 25% extra damage and is an absolute must-have on your weapon. The next talent here is Ferocious. This is a solid PvE talent and should not be overlooked, especially where the vast majority of enemies you're engaging are elites or named bosses. The final weapon talent, and probably the most important, is Talented. Killing a target with this weapon will increase your skill power by 15% for 20 seconds. Unfortunately, this buff does not stack, however, killing a new target refreshes the timer. In other words, this is a guaranteed 15% increase in skill power if you can land the killing blow on an enemy once every 20 seconds. This talent synergizes really well with Relentless since it enables your turret to do more damage, which in turn increases the amount of incoming heals you receive from the Relentless talent. It is now time for us to examine the Centurion. The first talent here is Expert. This is a solid damage boosting talent for your sidearm and is very effective when finishing off enemies with low health. The second and more crucial talent, however, is Cool-Headed. Performing headshots reduces all skill cooldowns by 5%. This is really important because there is no extra skill haste rolled on our gear, so the sidearm will have to be used ever so often to reduce cooldowns in order to quickly get the turret back up if it is destroyed by NPCs. Take note, however, that the way Cool-Headed works was changed with patch 1.6. and it now has a small cooldown on its own that prevents it from proccing on rapidly consecutive headshots. So instead of proccing on every headshot, it may proc on every third headshot if the shots are fired in rapid succession. It is now time for us to examine the final aspects of this build. The skills you would be using with this build are First Aid and Turret, with the Defibrillator and Dragon Breath modifications. The reason why we opted for Defibrillator and not Booster Shot is simple. Booster Shot cannot revive squad mates and does not provide healing over time. Legendary difficulty is incredibly punishing. There is only one checkpoint, so you have to ensure that you have all the tools at your disposal to prevent your team from wiping. Okay agents, we have now reached the most important part of this build guide, and that is ability talents. The first talent you need is Strike Back. It is crucial that you have this talent equipped since it is the main source of self-sustained skill haste in this build, and like Unforgiving, it just makes sense since the majority of time you're going to be at low health. The second talent you need is Wildfire. Applying burn to any target triggers a 30% chance per each target to apply the effect within 10 meters. This talent is another core element of this build and is what grants you your crowd controlling abilities and synergizes really well with the Distracted talent and 4-piece FireCrest bonus. It cannot be omitted. The third talent you need is Tech Support. Kill a hostile while any skill is deployed to extend any active skill's duration by 10%. Because the cooldown of your turret starts immediately after you deploy it, rather than after it's destroyed, as in the case of the healing station, This talent will help you keep your turret active while the skill recharges, essentially allowing you to maintain an actively deployed turret 99% of the time, once you can land a few killing blows. The final talent you will need is One is None. This essentially increases your magazine size by granting a 50% chance not to consume a bullet when you land a headshot, therefore increasing your DPS potential. And that, agents, brings us to the end of our guide. I hope you found this video useful or helpful in some way, and if so, feel free to drop a comment below, and don't forget to pop the like and share buttons if you enjoyed the vid. Once again, my name is Naga220, thanks for stopping by, and I will see you in the Division.